always say you're a smart guy, right? My name's Douglas. I was 34, worked at Ashmere Outfitters doing inventory management in Billings, Montana. That question came from my wife Lydia while she and her sister Sophia sat in the front seat of our Honda, engine running. I was standing beside a broken-down gas station in the middle of nowhere, holding a gas can we'd supposedly needed to fill. The joke had started simple enough. We'd been driving back from Sophia's place in Missoula when Lydia pulled over at this abandoned station about 50 mi from anything, said the car was making a noise, asked me to check the engine while she and Sophia grabbed drinks from the cooler. I'd been under the hood for maybe 2 minutes when I heard the door slam. "Douglas," Lydia called out, laughing, "we're going to see how smart you really are." I straightened up, wiped my hands on my jeans. "What do you mean?" Sophia was giggling in the passenger seat. These two had been planning something all weekend, whispering in corners, sharing looks. I'd figured it was about my birthday next week, or maybe some family surprise. "You keep talking about how you could survive anywhere," Lydia said, putting the car in drive. "Always reading those outdoor magazines, watching those survival shows. Now you get to prove it." The gas can in my hands felt heavier. "Lydia, what are you doing? Teaching you a lesson?" She tossed something out the window. My wallet landed in the gravel. "You've got no phone, no money, no ride, but you're such a smart guy, you'll figure it out." I looked around. Nothing but prairie grass, a few abandoned buildings and mountains in the distance. The nearest town had to be 30 minutes back the way we'd come, maybe 40 ahead. "This isn't funny," I said. "It's hilarious," Sophia chimed in. "You should see your face." Lydia gunned the engine. "Maybe next time you won't act like you know everything. See you at home." A genius. They drove off, dust cloud following them down the 2-lane highway. I watched until the Honda disappeared over a hill, then picked up my wallet, empty except for my license and old business card from the feed store where I'd bought supplies for Lydia's garden last spring. The sun was already low. Temperature would drop fast once it got dark. I'd been camping before shore, but never without gear, never without warning, never as punishment for something I couldn't even name. I walked toward the abandoned station, looking for shelter. The windows were boarded up, but the back had a loading dock that might block the wind. Behind the building, I found a dumpster that stank of old oil and something rotten. That was where I spent my first night as a different kind of man. I'd met Lydia 5 years earlier at a company barbecue. She worked for the county assessor's office, had this way of making everything sound like common sense. I was drawn to that certainty, especially after my dad died and left me feeling lost about what came next. We married after a year of dating. She moved into my rental house on the south side of Billings, and for a while, things felt solid. She made decent money. I brought home a steady paycheck from the outfitter store. Nothing fancy, but we weren't struggling. The problem started small. Comments about my job, mostly. How I was wasting my potential doing inventory instead of something more ambitious. When I'd mention ideas about maybe starting a business or learning a trade, she'd get that look like I was being unrealistic. "You're not a business owner, Douglas," she'd say. "You're good at following instructions. Stick to what you know." Sophia encouraged it. She'd moved back to Montana after her divorce, landed a job at a marketing firm in Missoula, always had stories about successful people she'd met, important clients, big opportunities, made Lydia feel like she was settling by being married to someone who worked retail. The survival stuff had started as a hobby. I'd grown up hunting with my dad, knew enough about the outdoors to be comfortable. After he passed, I kept reading about bushcraft, watching videos about living off the land. Not because I planned to disappear into the wilderness, but because it connected me to something real. Lydia hated it. Said I was playing pretend instead of focusing on my career. When I'd suggest we go camping, she'd roll her eyes. When I'd mentioned something I'd learned about tracking or fire starting, she'd change the subject. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. How she'd stopped asking about my day at work. How she'd started spending more time with Sophia, coming home with stories about how successful people lived. How she'd begun talking about me in the third person when we were with other people, like I wasn't there. "Douglas thinks he's some kind of mountain man," she'd tell her friends, laughing. "Lives in a fantasy world." The truth was simpler. I'd been trying to impress someone who didn't want to be impressed by me. I'd been seeking approval from someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth respecting. And somewhere along the way, I'd started believing her version of who I was. But sitting behind that dumpster, listening to coyotes call across the empty prairie, I realized something. Maybe Lydia was right about one thing. I was going to find out exactly how smart I really was. Just not the way she'd expected. I woke up stiff and cold, back pressed against the concrete loading dock. The sun was just coming up over the mountains, and I could hear cattle lowing somewhere in the distance. My mouth tasted like dust and regret. First thing I did was inventory. Wallet with my license, car keys that were useless now, the clothes on my back, a book of matches I'd forgotten in my jacket pocket from some restaurant. Not much, but it was something. The nearest ranch was maybe 2 miles north based on the sound of those cattle. I started walking. The rancher's name was Clayton Phillips. He was feeding horses in a corral when I came up his drive, looking like I'd slept rough, which I had. "You broken down somewhere?" he asked, not unfriendly but cautious. I told him the truth, most of it anyway, that my wife had left me stranded as a joke, that I needed to get back to town. I left out the part about how she'd done it to teach me a lesson about being too confident. Clayton studied me for a long moment. "That's a hell of a joke," he said finally. "You hungry?" Over breakfast, he asked about my work. When I mentioned the outfitter store, he nodded. "Know that place? You hunt much?" "Used to with my dad." "What about cattle? Ever work around livestock?" I shook my head. "Not really." "Why?" He leaned back in his chair. "I'm short-handed right now. My regular guy's laid up with a back injury and I've got a herd to move next week. Pays decent if you're willing to learn." Something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way he asked, like my answer mattered. Maybe it was sitting in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and bacon instead of garbage and motor oil. Or maybe it was just that someone was offering me work instead of lectures about what I couldn't do. "I'm willing," I said. Clayton drove me to town that afternoon so I could get my car and explain to Lydia where I'd been. She was watching television when I walked in, didn't even look up. "How was your adventure, genius?" she asked. "Educational," I said. She glanced over then, maybe hearing something different in my voice. "Did you learn your lesson?" "Yeah," I said. "I did, but not the lesson she'd intended. I'd learned that when someone strips away everything you think you need, what's left is what you actually are. And I'd learned that some people will help a stranger while others will abandon their own husband for a laugh." I went to the bedroom and packed a bag. Told Lydia I was taking that ranch job, that I'd be staying in Clayton's bunkhouse for a while. "You're running away," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm running towards something." I called in sick to the outfitter store the next morning and drove back to Clayton's ranch. He had me working cattle by sunrise, teaching me to read their behavior, how to move them without spooking them. It was harder than I'd expected, but satisfying in a way inventory management had never been. After 3 days, Lydia called. "When are you coming home?" People are asked. Wing questions. What kind of questions? About where you are, about us. Sophia thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. I watched Clayton's border collie work a stubborn heifer toward the gate. The dog knew exactly what to do, moved with purpose and intelligence. No one questioned his instincts. "Maybe I am," I said. "Douglas, this is ridiculous. You have a real job, benefits, a future." "Doing what?" "Counting fishing lures for the rest of my life. Providing for your family, being responsible. Not everyone gets to play cowboy." The word play stung. Same tone she used when I'd mentioned camping or hunting or anything that didn't fit her idea of adult behavior. "I'll be home Sunday," I said, and hung up. But Sunday came and I stayed, called my manager at the store, told him I needed another week for family emergency. It wasn't exactly a lie. My marriage was definitely an emergency, just not the kind he'd assume. Clayton was patient with my mistakes, quick to praise improvement. By the end of the second week, I could rope decent enough to help with branding. By the third week, I was riding fence lines and checking water sources on my own. "You've got good instincts," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from his porch. "Most city folks try to force things. You listen." When I finally went home, Lydia was waiting with divorce papers. "Really?" I said, looking at the manila envelope on the kitchen table. "You've been gone 3 weeks, Douglas. 3 weeks playing ranch hand while I tell everyone my husband is having a midlife crisis." "I've been working, learning something new. You've been avoiding responsibility." She sat down across from me, folded her hands like she was conducting a business meeting. Sophia thinks you're trying to punish me for the joke, that you're being dramatic. The joke? I almost laughed. That's what we're calling it. It was harmless. We came back for you the next morning, but you were already gone. We figured you'd hitchhiked home or something. This was news to me. You came back? Of course we came back. We're not monsters, Douglas, but you'd already left with that rancher. Made us look like the bad guys. I stared at her. 3 weeks of good work, of learning skills that mattered, of feeling respected for the first time in years, and she thought it was about punishing her. Sign the papers, she said. I'll keep the house. You keep your truck. Clean break. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. What if I don't want a clean break? Then you come home, get your old job back, act like a grown-up. The choice felt simple. Go back to counting inventory and listening to lectures about my limitations, or keep working with cattle and learning from people who valued competence over comfort. I need time to think, I said. You've had 3 weeks to think. That's the problem. I left the papers on the table and drove back to the ranch. Clayton was in the barn checking a mare who was due to foal. How'd it go? He asked. She wants a divorce. He nodded like he'd expected it. Some folks can't handle change in other people. Makes them question their own choices. She thinks I'm being irresponsible. Maybe. Or maybe you're being responsible too. The person you actually are instead of the person she wanted you to be. I signed the divorce papers 6 months later after Clayton offered me a permanent position as his ranch foreman. The pay was less than the outfitter store, but it came with housing and a percentage of the cattle profits. More importantly, it came with respect. Lydia kept the house in Billings. I kept my truck, my tools, and a small savings account she hadn't known about. What I didn't keep was the feeling that I needed to prove myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't worth believing in. The ranch work suited me. I learned to read weather patterns, manage breeding schedules, negotiate with feed suppliers. Clayton introduced me to other ranchers in the area, and I started picking up side work during busy seasons. Nothing dramatic, just steady progress toward becoming the kind of man who solved problems instead of creating them. Lydia and Sophia moved to Missoula together after the divorce was final. According to mutual friends, they were having a great time. Shopping trips, spa weekends, dating wealthy men who owned businesses, living the life Lydia had always wanted. I heard about it through my old coworker Jake, who'd stayed in touch. He'd stop by the ranch sometimes, usually with stories about how well Lydia was doing without me. She looks happy, he'd say, like he was doing me a favor by sharing updates. Really happy, like she's finally living her best life. I'd nod and offer him a beer, but I noticed he never had much to say about his own life. Still counting fishing lures, still complaining about management, still talking about changes he might make someday. The truth hit me during my second winter on the ranch. I was fixing fence in a snowstorm, hands numb despite my gloves, when I realized I hadn't thought about Lydia in weeks. Not missed her, not felt angry about the divorce, not wondered what she was doing. She'd simply stopped being relevant to my daily experience. That scared me at first. 5 years of marriage should leave more of a mark, shouldn't it? But then I understood. I'd been mourning the wrong thing. I'd been sad about losing her when what I should have been celebrating was finding myself. Clayton was getting older. Talking about retirement, his kids lived in California. Had no interest in ranching. When he mentioned selling to a development company, I made him an offer. Let me buy the place with a long-term payment plan, taking it out of profits and my foreman's salary. You sure about this? He asked. It's a big risk. I'm sure, I said. This is what I want to do. What about your ex-wife? She know you're thinking about owning land. I hadn't told anyone except the bank about my plans. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it felt important to keep it quiet until everything was finalized. Like speaking the dream out loud might jinx it. She doesn't need to know, I said. We don't talk anymore. Clayton nodded. Probably for the best. Some people can't handle seeing others succeed, especially when they figured you for a failure. The paperwork took 3 months to complete. Background checks, financial reviews, inspections, negotiations with the county about water rights. But by spring, I owned 800 acres of prime grazing land and a house that overlooked the Yellowstone River Valley. I was 37 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The ranch prospered under my ownership. I expanded the herd, improved the pasture management, and started offering hunting guides during elk season. It spread among serious hunters about the quality of the experience, and I was booking clients a year in advance. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought complications. Jake called one afternoon in late summer. "Hey Douglas, Lydia's been asking about you. I was replacing boards on the main corral, sweating in the afternoon heat." "What kind of asking?" "Just wondering how you're doing, where you're living. She heard from someone that you're still ranching, and she seemed surprised. I think she figured you'd moved back to town by now, maybe gotten your old job back." That evening I drove into Billings to get supplies. As I was loading feed sacks into my truck, I noticed a familiar Honda in the parking lot. Lydia and Sophia were coming out of the grocery store, both looking like they dressed for an occasion instead of shopping. They saw me at the same time I saw them. For a moment nobody moved. Then Lydia walked over, Sophia trailing behind. "Douglas," she said like she was greeting an old acquaintance. "You looked different. 3 years of outdoor work had changed me. My hands were calloused, my shoulders broader from lifting hay bales and wrestling cattle. I'd grown my hair longer, kept a beard through the winter, but the biggest change was probably in how I carried myself." "Different how?" I asked. "Older, more serious." She glanced at my truck loaded with expensive feed and veterinary supplies. "Still playing rancher?" "Still ranching?" I corrected. Sophia stepped closer. "We heard you bought Clayton's place. Is that true?" Word travels fast in Montana, especially news about someone making a significant purchase when most people figured them for a failure. "It's true," I said. "How?" Lydia's voice had an edge now. "How could you afford to buy a ranch? Hard work, good decisions, little bit of luck." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You worked retail, Douglas. You counted fishing lures. People like us don't just become ranch owners. People like us. You know what I mean? Regular people. Normal people." I finished loading the last feed sack and closed the tailgate. "Maybe you're right. Maybe normal people don't become ranch owners. So, what are you saying? That you're special now?" "I'm saying maybe I was never as normal as you thought." Sophia laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Douglas. This whole thing is just an extended reaction to our joke. You're trying to prove some point about being independent." "What joke was that?" "You know, the gas station thing when we left you to figure things out on your own." "You mean when you abandoned me in the middle of nowhere without money or transportation?" "It was supposed to be funny," Lydia said. "We came back the next morning, but you were gone. We figured you'd learned your lesson and went home." I looked at them both. These two women who'd thought it would be hilarious to strand me as punishment for having confidence in myself. They still thought it was funny. Still thought the whole thing was about teaching me humility. "I did learn a lesson," I said, "just not the one you intended." I got in my truck and drove away, leaving them standing in the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see them talking, probably trying to figure out how the man they'd left behind a dumpster had ended up owning 800 acres while they were buying groceries with coupons. The plan was already forming in my mind. I heard through Jake that Lydia and Sophia had moved back to Billings. Apparently, the Missoula adventure hadn't worked out as planned. Sophia had been laid off from the marketing firm, and the wealthy men they'd been dating had turned out to be less wealthy than advertised. They were sharing an apartment near the mall, both working retail jobs to make ends meet. Lydia had taken a position at a department store. Sophia was selling cosmetics at a kiosk, the kind of jobs they'd probably considered beneath them a few years earlier. I was in town getting ranch insurance paperwork notarized when I saw Lydia through the window of Kelmore and Finch department store. She was folding sweaters, wearing a name tag, looking tired in a way I remembered from our worst days together. I parked my truck directly in front of the store and walked in. She looked up when I approached her section, and I watched her face cycle through,